Mr. Plaskett.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Horowitz, for being here. I have since, I'm further down in seniority, I have the ability to now ask you some questions trying to clarify what my other colleagues were discussing with you. In your discussion with Mr. Meadows, there was a question that the text sent between Mr. Strzok and Ms. Page discussed the White House running this. You said you assumed that this text was not referring to the Clinton email matter and that you assumed it referred to the Russia investigation. I just want to clear up. Do you actually know who the text was referring to?
I'm sorry, when the particular
The text that says the White House is running this.
No, I think it was my understanding, just a general reference to the White House. I don't know if there was a particular person.
And if it was to discuss the Russia investigation, it's not the Russia collusion investigation by the special counsel. It's
Correct.
referring to the Russia election interference
Correct.
investigation, right? We have so many investigations
Right.
here. Let's keep them in line. Now, also in your discussion with Mr. Meadows, there seemed to be some logical analogy that was made. And as an attorney, that's one thing that we look at is the logical inferences. And I wasn't sure if it was necessarily correct. The discussion was that if you have a person who has a disproportionate bias in their personal, that you also then have to look at their disproportionate amount of decision-making in determining how that. Is that necessarily how one determines if their bias, in fact, affects the outcome?
I had understood it as that they would have a disproportionate, given their role, impact on decisions that were made.
Okay.
And that may be
and that's if their personal bias then bled into their work as well, correct?
Correct. And I think in terms of answering it was there did they in fact cause an impact, but rather, given their role, did they have a disproportionate?
So the disproportionate bias of Page and Strzok, in terms of their bias against now President Trump, was that disproportionate in size to their decision-making?
I wouldn't know, as I said earlier, I don't have precisely which decisions they made over this period of time.
Let's move on to someone else who may have had a bias. My former boss, Director Comey, was a Republican, was he not?
I've read that. I don't know at the time, though,
I
whether
worked with
he
him in a
was.
Republican administration.
I've heard also he changed his registration, so I don't know what the.
So I worked with him in a Republican administration when he was the Deputy Attorney General of the Justice Department. Would his bias as a Republican and him being the decision maker have affected why he decided not to leak or not to discuss the Russia investigation itself?
Our concern about what Mr. Strzok did was what Ms. Page does wasn't based on their political affiliation, but rather on the text messages. So whether Mr. Comey
Did you know their political affiliation?
I do not know their political affiliation.
But we know the affiliation of Mr. Comey, but we're not going to count that against him?
I think you have every right to register with whichever political party or none at all, and that
Sure, because we are still a democracy, are we not?
Correct.
But listening to my colleagues, it would seem that if anyone has a personal opinion about someone, that it should automatically exclude them from working in the FBI or working anyplace else, and that justices should not be blind anymore.
I don't think, and I don't think I've suggested that your personal opinion prohibits you from working in the FBI or the Justice Department. The concern here are the text messages that they exchanged about people that they're looking at.
I mean, before the election, many of my colleagues had a bias against Trump, but it appears now that he's the chief executive that they've all fallen right in line and follow right behind whatever he says, even though many of them made public statements against him and against some of the opinions that he had before he became president. In your investigation, you said you looked at 1.2 million documents, correct?
Correct.
And in those documents, which are now being subpoenaed by Chairman Gowdy as well as Chairman Goodlatte, on the documents for investigation on the FBI's handling of Secretary Clinton's emails, have you had access to all of the documents that the Justice Department has subpoenaed but haven't received? Isn't that correct?
That the Justice Department, you mean the Congress has subpoenaed? Sorry.
Correct, yes.
Yes, we've had access to all the records.
And your
we've
office
asked.
was able to review those documents and any other documents that's needed as part of your investigation for this report.
Correct.
And your report concluded, and I quote, "We found no evidence that the conclusions by the department prosecutors were affected by bias or other improper considerations. Rather, we determined that they were based on the prosecutor's assessment of the facts, the law, and past department practices." Correct?
Correct.
And so I just want you to be careful, because now that you have not followed the conclusion the Republicans would like you to, you may in fact be up for a special counsel investigation yourself, and I yield back.